Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Justice Kurian Joseph, Dr. Thomas Isaac, Dr. Shetty, Dr. Naganathan, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset thank Justice Kurian Joseph for inviting me to speak on the issue of union-state relations, particularly on fiscal federalism. I don't want to compartmentalize as fiscal federalism because, it's not pure economics that we are talking about. After all, economics is a footnote to politics. So obviously, when we are talking about federalism, however much we try to pretend that, it's a purely economic subject, it's not exactly purely economics. There is a lot of political issues that come in. And I'm not really sure why am I here, first of all, because, very eminent jurists, legal experts, political personalities, and among all these, I think I'm a lone economist around. I know Dr. Joseph is an economist, but he is more into politics than economics. My good friend Albert Breton, who was possibly the first person to speak about competitive federalism. In one of his articles, he says that political scientists and legal experts look upon economies as some strange animals with a model at hand and looking for application. So in that sense, I don't know what. So I'm not going to be compartmentalizing only economics. I'm also going to bring about some political issues. What I intend to do in the next few minutes is to, in fact, quite a bit of repetition there will be. Ask a question, what is federalism? The basic question I want to ask, what is federalism? Is India a federal country? And what is fiscal federalism? What are the conceptual issues? In fact, all the time, it's like in our economics discourse, we always think that government is a benevolent social guardian and in looking after the welfare of the people. You ask really a question, are the governments benevolent? Are they really looking after the welfare of the people? There is a branch of economics, public finance, which basically says that government is a necessary evil. It is an evil, nevertheless. It's a necessary evil because there are certain things which the market cannot provide. And therefore, government has to come in. Safety and security of the people, protection of property rights, enforcement of contracts. These are some of the things which the markets won't do. But apart from that, if you say that government is maximizing the welfare of the people, one doesn't really know whether politicians are maximizing their own welfare or maximizing the welfare of the people. But anyway, that apart. So in the same way, it has become a cliche to say that cooperative federalism. Where is it? Do you see on an everyday case cooperation vertically between a union and the states and horizontal between one state and another? It is in this context that it's the same Albert Breton I was talking about. He was a member of the MacDonald Commission in Canada on federal provincial relations. So at the end of the day, he wrote a minority report and it titled it as Towards a Competitive Federalism, which was published in the European Journal of Political Economy next year. And the entire branch called Competitive Federalism came up. Cooperation is possible. I will come to that. Under what circumstances cooperation can happen and but the general attitude, if you see every day, is one of competition. And competition can enhance efficiency. But then there are preconditions. You can't have a predatory competition the way we have in the system. But anyway, let me start by saying that asking a question, what is federalism? As Alexei Tocqueville said 150 years ago, the federal system was created with the intention of combining different advantages which result from the magnitude and littleness of nations. That means that you need to have a scale economy in the provision of public services. At the same time, you need to respect the preferences and the special characteristics of individual units. So magnitude and littleness, because respecting the preferences of the people is as important as trying to work out on the magnitude, whether it is for the defense of the country or whether it is for foreign policy or certain other things. And of course, the economist's view, particularly the fiscal federalism economist's view, that every country is a federal country. And because every country has a bit of a decentralization. Now, even though a constitutional sense a country is unitary, even a unitary country has federal characteristics, and therefore, you see, it's a question of degree of federalism rather than federalism. That's what my good teacher Wallace Oates said. But then, in contrast to that, political scientists called, like Kenneth Peary, came up and said that, look, every unit has to be coordinate and independent. If you have to have a coordinate and independent, then obviously, you don't have such classical federalism except four, which is the United States, Switzerland, UK, Australia, and Canada. So you have this contrasting. Again, my friend Breton comes up with the thing. There is a beautiful article which he wrote in a journal called Publius, the Journal of Federalism, where he says the basic difference between decentralization and federalism is basically the ownership rights guaranteed in the Constitution. That means Constitution does not allow the extinguishment of a unit under the federal system. In a unitary system, you can extinguish a unit, whereas in a federal system, there are safeguards, constitutional safeguards against extinguishment. Then the question is India federal? If you ask that question, if you bring in Article 3, basically you say that the government can virtually balkanize the state and remove, change the boundaries of a state, add two more states into one and do virtually anything. And as it happened in the case of Andhra Pradesh, the only thing it is required to do is to ask inform the legislature of the state that it's going to dismember it. But anyway, now there is a lot of work that has been done. As I said, as an economist, I had tendency to talk about theories which I will not go into, particularly because there is not much of this thing. But then, when we talk about cooperative federalism, under what conditions cooperation can happen? Cooperation can happen only if there are two parties, only when both the parties gain. If one party gains more than the other party, then even then the competition is difficult. Now, the party which gains more has to bribe the party which gains less in order to cooperate. So, in other words, there are, for example, in the case of when we introduced GST, everybody thought that GST will gain. But then the union government had to promise that it will give the compensation to the states increased at the rate of 16% every year. It had to bribe the states in order to agree for this thing. So union government's interest was, you will have a harmonized tax system. The states thought this is the way to go. Anyway, our revenues will be safeguarded. So, but then cooperation is necessary. It is not that, in a large country, whether you have, you don't even not say it, you may see most of the times competition taking place, whether it is for investment or whether it is for river water dispute or whether it is for any of the things. But then you have a lot of competition that goes on, but then cooperation is necessary. But one of the important things that is necessary when you say cooperation is necessary, you don't have systems and institutions which promote competition in the country. This is here that I want to flag Rajamannar Committee's report, which basically said that you need an institution, there is an institutional vacuum for intergovernmental coordination, bargaining, and conflict resolution. We don't have one. Now, he recommended the Interstate Council. Administrative Reforms Commission recommended the Interstate Council. This is necessary not merely because of this thing. Even in competition, you need to prevent a predatory competition. You need an institution for resolving. For everything, you cannot go to the Supreme Court. You do not have an institution for intergovernmental coordination, conflict resolution. Now, they had the Planning Commission. The state used to listen to Planning Commission only because it used to give some money. I know there was a Gadgil formula, but within that Gadgil formula, 20% of money was special problems of the states, and that was where the discretion came in. And the chief minister would go with an entourage of people to the Planning Commission, and then bargaining would be done. But then, other than that, you had the National Development Council, which never met, and if it met, it was only a speech-making body, and you created an interstate council. This was recommended by the Rajamannar Committee, Administrative Reforms Commission, so on and so forth. Finally, when Vishwanath Pratap Singh became the Prime Minister, he said, I am going to institute it. So he amended the constitution and created an interstate council. Then what did he do? He simply put it under the Union Home Ministry. So created a birth defect. Because Union Home Ministry, you can't be an umpire if you are a player. If you are putting the interstate council within the Union Home Ministry completely, took away its, and then of course they removed the Planning Commission, brought in Niti Aayog. Now Niti Aayog, nobody listens. Why would anybody listen? So obviously you have a major vacuum in the system for intergovernmental coordination. We do need, if at all, one thing that needs to be done is to take out the Interstate Council from the Union Home Ministry, and maybe Niti Aayog can be converted into a part of it, maybe this thing, and make it completely independent of the union government. You can't, otherwise, this is one of the biggest vacuums in the intergovernmental fiscal relations, at least, not having an interstate council. And of course, if you are talking about intergovernmental competition, obviously there also you need an institution for monitoring, and for everything you can't go to the courts and then decide. And you need a measure of competitive equality, a measure of cost-benefit appropriability in order to do that. Now, in fact, Honorable, earlier speakers have already spoke about the various centralizing features in the Indian Union. There are several. There is an inherent centripetal bias, but then over a period of time, the extent of, there was initially a centripetal bias, but then over a period of time, the centralization increased enormously. And it's not just yesterday or today, but then using that particular item called economic and social planning, the entire resource allocation in the country was controlled through through the planning process. The union government would prepare the plans, and the state governments had to align their plans to what the union government prepared. Now, my good mentor, Raja Chalaya, used to say, centralized planning is a negation of federalism. Now, but then, when you say in 91, when we said that things will go, the planning process will stop, what really happened was, we said that both the markets will get a better role and the state governments will get a better role. That did not happen because the vestiges of the plan process have continued. So if you really see the type of centralization that you have, now you have a series of them. One is, this has also been talked about, heavy leaning of the Government of India Act, heavy leaning of the Constitution and the Government of India Act of 1935. The interesting part is that there were something like 235 sections of the Government of India Act which was simply cannibalized into the Constitution. 235 sections of the Government of India Act of 1935 were taken into this thing, and Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister, initially said, before the Constitution, said this is a framework of slavery, Government of India Act. But later, he has said it's an organic link between the old and new. The only same person who said this is a mark of slavery moved over to and said that it's an organic link. And, let me also draw attention to an interesting book by Madhav Godbole. It's in 2021, India, the Federal Union of States, where he discusses, among many other things, even the role of the governors, where he says that the governors have no role in this particular system. Madhav Godbole was a very respected Union Home Secretary when Babri Masjid was brought down, and he resigned because he wanted Kalyan Singh government to, his advice to the government was Kalyan Singh government should go, and then Narasimha Rao did not do it, and he resigned from the Home Ministry. But anyway, he was one of my good friends of mine. He passed away a couple of years ago. But this was the last book. He had written a number of books, including Governance in Judiciary, which was released by Justice Sri Krishna. But anyway, that's an aside. So you have, considering the fact that you have virtually borrowed most of the things from the Government of India of 1935, it's not very surprising that there is a huge centripetal bias in the Constitution. You have Article 3, which basically, everybody knows, I don't want to repeat that. You have the Article 249, which says that Rajya Sabha can transfer any item in list 2 or, list 1, list 2 to either to the list 3 or list 1 with the simple majority. You have Article 352, where the President can proclaim emergency. You have 356, where breakdown of constitutional machinery of a state, and dismissal of state until the SR Bombay issue came up in the Supreme Court. It was not even judiciable. It is only in the SR Bombay case you said it is judiciable. And you have Article 301, which guarantees freedom of trade and commerce throughout the country. But then Article 302 and 3 say that, look, you can put, the union government can put restrictions on public interest. And of course, concurrent list contains economic and social planning, as I said. And in the economic and social planning, virtually everything can be done. And even in the case where you are talking about institutions of national importance, you can encroach on the state subjects by creating institutions of national importance. In the health sector, for example, you can create All India Institute of Medical Sciences wherever you want. So institutions of special importance can be on any subject. In fact, in the 14th Finance Commission, we did some work to see what proportion, over a period of time, how the union government has been encroaching. From 2002 to 2012, union government spending on the state subject increased from 15% to 20%. And union government spending on the concurrent subjects increased from 13 to 17%. And entire thing is done through the instrumentality of what is called the centrally sponsored schemes. In fact, there is a report which I prepared for the Niti Aayog on the centrally sponsored schemes, which was submitted in 2017. Now, somebody, you were mentioning about the type of the problems that we have. In Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, an elementary school thing, there are somewhere about 26 different interventions, and the states are required to prepare the budget for 26 different interventions. This has to be approved by the Government of India, and if any change has to be made, allocation is made to the 26 interventions. If any change has to be made, you have to get the approval of the Government of India. In the case of health sector, there are 2,000 budget heads, minor heads, and this was reported in the Niti Aayog's report itself. Now, if you don't trust them, and you want to say there is a cooperation, what type of a cooperation are you talking about if you can't trust the states, and if you put all sorts of conditions, no, that's, and even to say this thing, even the Finance Commission, which are supposed to be independent, come and then start putting conditions. Now, the funny part of it is conditions to the local bodies, condition to the state governments for the local bodies functioning. That means that if the state government doesn't do the thing, local bodies don't get the money. Now, it's unimaginable. The state government doesn't hold the elections, and then local bodies don't get the money. These are some of the things that have gone on, but there have been, as I said, there has been a creeping centralization. First of all, you had the centralizing this thing, and over the years, centralization has happened through creation of all India institutions, through the creation of, through the expansion of centrally sponsored schemes. And there is an interesting case. Even when you have Finance Commission making recommendations in the transfers, you can negate them. You can dilute them. You see, there is a tradition in this country that the Finance Commission recommendations, basic recommendations are accepted on tax devolution and grants. Now the grant portion has gone off. In fact, the union government no longer respects that. But in the tax devolution, what they do is, they go on increasing the cesses and surcharges. They go, they create lots of things. In fact, the 14th Finance Commission, for example, after looking at since the plan, even since we had the objective, our scope was not only to look at the non-plan revenue expenditure, but also the plan revenue expenditure. We increased the tax devolution from 32% to 42%. Even today that is talked about. Now, when we increased it from 32 to 42%, the union government did two things. One, they went on increasing any change in the discretionary change in the tax policy at the center. They went on doing it through cesses and surcharges. And the share of cesses and surcharges increased from about 10 to 12% to almost 20%. Because cess and surcharge goes only to the union government. And the second, they said they appointed a committee to look at the centrally sponsored schemes. And then centrally sponsored that, now earlier, most of the programs used to have the ratio of sharing between 75 and 25. They changed, most of them have been changed into 60-40. Because they classified, they consolidated the number into 29. There were 66 earlier, they consolidated into 29. They classified it core of the core and optional. And most of them are under the core, the optional, the core systems. And core system was created, the sharing ratio was made 60-40 from 75-25, which existed earlier. Now, the other thing is, it's not that what they do will help everyone. In fact, it was 3 years ago, union government said that, we want to reform, and then started, talking about the agricultural policies. Agriculture is a state subject. You can't just go about saying that I will reform the thing. You need to have consultations. You have to have discussions. You have to meet the farmers. However good the reform proposal is, any botched reform is a retrograde step, and it is going to hurt us more than anything else. So obviously, we will stand up and say that, we will stand for the farmers, but that is the job of the state. That is not the job of the union government. So there have, as I said, although your schedule 7th schedule tells you what the union has to do, what the states have to do, the distinction gets blurred with the central, union executive. Now let me come to some brief thing about transfers. Again in theory, why do you give transfers? If you assign the tax policy, right to levy the tax according to the comparative advantage, obviously union government has an advantage, because I may get my income from here, I may get my income from the United States, I may get income from anywhere. So the income tax, the information gathered, there is a comparative advantage by the union government in levying the taxes on consumption, sort of income. Similarly, there are certain incomes. So if you assign, principle of subsidiarity requires as much of the expenditure function will have to go to the states or the local bodies. Now, but then if you see that, obviously there is an imbalance between the revenue raising powers and expenditure powers. And again, there is a lot of imbalance between one state and another in terms of their ability to raise revenues. Now this ability, again, the principle of horizontal equity requires that equals should be treated equally. So that would mean that people, you need to enable every state to provide comparable levels of services. It is not equalizing incomes. Comparable levels of services at comparable tax support. Even that is not possible in the type of system that we are living in, where the revenue raising power of Bihar is something like 1/6 of the revenue raising power of Telangana. In fact, in 2023-24, Telangana had the highest per capita income. Next was Karnataka, next was Haryana. That's the way it was. But the point is Now, you can't, and then again, there is also another thing that we also need to understand. Oh, we have been giving so much of money to these fellows, but they are laggards. You know, you are only trying to provide public services. Much of the loan they are not able to take because their per capita income is low. You have a FRBM Act, they can borrow only 3%. Their level of borrowing is less, so their infrastructure levels are bad. I mean, there are issues of that nature. Again, for want of time, I will not go into. But the point is, general purpose transfers are supposed to enable the state to provide, a measurable quality of service. Specific purpose transfers are given to ensure a minimum standard of service in respect of those services which are considered meritorious. Now, you can't have 29 groups of this thing under the centrally sponsored scheme. That's a specific purpose transfer. They are not meritorious. You need to have 3, 4, elementary education, basic health care, poverty alleviation, and then you try to go whole hog and then ensure that they have a minimum standard so that, they can come up. No, there is not one centrally sponsored scheme where the target is specified. You don't have a target. You just go on, Namami Gange. Go on spending water and money on cleaning water, nothing happens. So there is a thin spread of resources. There is no proper design in the things. And obviously, even the targeting has not been very good. Again, that doesn't fall less. In the process, what happens is that you only create more and more disparities in the system. And the finance commissions, there is a complaint that, these 5 wise men come in and take a decision. The fellows who are not unelected body called the finance commission. No, but then the Article 281 says the president, sort of causes this report of the finance commission to be placed in the parliament with the explanatory memorandum of the union government, which basically means at the end of the day, it is not for approval, but then the union government decides, the executive decides what has to be accepted and what should not be accepted. And I still consider that there are a lot of things that the finance commission does which is wrong. A lot of things needs to be done. It is still a work in progress. But by and large, one has seen that there is no specific bias exhibited in the this thing. And there is one other thing that I want to bring to the fore, which may be of relevance here. This 73rd and 74th Amendment of the Constitution. There is a basic birth defect in the amendment. The birth defect comes as follows. Now you have created Schedule 11 and 12, which is, and the constitutional provision says that the states may, at their discretion, assign these subjects given in Schedule 11 and this thing. They can also give other subjects. They may and they may not. And entry 5 in the state list says that local self-government is the state subject. If the Gram Panchayats or the Panchayats and the urban local bodies are local self-governments, and if they have to have an independent, why is it that it becomes the state, the responsibility of the state, local self-government has to go to the state government? No, there is a saying, everybody wants decentralization, but only up to his level. We do need to go beyond. If you really want decentralization, then we'll have to really review how we have to do this, how we can strengthen the local bodies. See, now what has happened is that, except in Kerala where there is a lot of work that Thomas Isaac and Professor Gulati did, where there is a demand for decentralization. Elsewhere, there is no demand for decentralization. Now, demand for decentralization has to come in if it has to succeed. That's the point that I want to make. And then your constitutional mechanism basically tells you that I'll impose decentralization on you. And that may or may not work. That's something which there are, there are very few champions elsewhere. That's the point that I was trying to make. Uh, well, I can go on because as I said, there are several problems with the central sponsor schemes, and it's a convenient way to interfere with the state subject. And there's a way in which you can dilute the reform, you dilute the recommendation made by the Finance Commission, and then you have too many schemes, too thin spread of resources, and nothing gets done. None of the schemes, targets are specified, and when you don't specify the targets, obviously don't expect anything to happen. So we don't monitor and then say that this much of money we have spent on this, what is the outcome? Is not something which we see. And then there is a tremendous amount of trust deficit. In fact, the states are forced to go into it because people will say that, look, I mean, they will come up and say that your state has not opted for this particular thing. We were giving the money, but your state is not taking the money. Now, that may not be the priority of a state. And you are forcing the state to do this. And in the process, what has happened is there is a proliferation of bureaucracy. So many bureaucrats to look after this thing. And there is a lot of uncertainty to the states because they get committed to the centrally sponsored scheme. Suddenly they say that no, this year there is no money, we will not give it. The states have to continue. So these problems continue. So Indian federalism, Indian Union of States, let me put it this way, is still a work in progress. I think we need champions to do that. And I'm sure, I still consider Rajmannar report and consult it often because many of the things, in fact, the idea of predominantly the idea of, the interstate council, which is, to me, is the most important idea because we do need a monitor. You do need an institution for bargaining and conflict resolution. For everything, you can't go to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is saddled with many things, including its trade offs. At the end of the day, you need to deal with the real issues. And I think it's still a work in progress. And I think this committee can do a lot to further this. See, in spite of the fact that this was Rajmannar committee report was from here, the whole country has seen it through. So let me point out that one other trend, there has been an increasing disharmony between the union and the states in recent times. And I hope, some good sense will prevail. And the existing institutions that monitor, which is the courts, the free press, and the bureaucracy, will do their job. Thank you very much.